Hey guys, it's Jen. Welcome back to my channel. So today we have another new palette dupes video. I had polled you guys on Instagram and here on my community page, and overwhelmingly you said you wanted me to keep doing these every Friday, so I'm definitely going to keep doing them as long as you guys are interested in watching them. And if you missed parts 1 and 2, or if you're new to my channel, I'll go ahead and link those right above here, because I did get a couple of requests on Instagram and also here on YouTube asking me to dupe the new Too Faced Born This Way Natural Nudes and Amrezy, and a few that I've already covered, so I will link those above, and that way you can just go and check those out if you're interested. But let's go ahead and dive right into today's video. And just again, if you're new, these aren't exact shade for shade dupes or knockoffs. What I'm basically doing is just going through my collection and finding things that are similar to new palettes that are out already, and that way maybe if you have your eye on something but you already have these other palettes in your collection, you may decide that you don't necessarily need to run right out and buy the new one. So let's go ahead and dive right in and get started. Okay, so first let's start out with this new Wet n Wild Bretman Rock collab. So this one is $14.99, so it's already very affordable, and if you're a supporter of his, then you're probably going to want to buy this anyway, regardless of whether or not you have other similar palettes in your collection. But when I first saw this, the very first palette it reminded me of was the mini Norvina palette. I think it's number 3. This one is so incredibly close. You have that bright pop of matte blue in there. You also have that matte forest green, you have the hot pink, you have the shimmery deep blue, you also have like that kind of shimmery copper shade, you have the ivory shade. I mean, you really have so many almost identical colors. There's more colors in the Bretman Rock palette, but if you already have this little Norvina one, you already have so many of the same shades. It may not necessarily make sense to run right out and buy the new one. Another one that I thought looked very similar color-wise is the Glamlight paint palette. So if you already have this one, then you already have very similar shades, again with the red, the bright orange, that green matte, some of the blues, the pink. I mean, really it has a lot of the same colors in here. You are missing that kind of coppery shimmer, and also the one next to it, that more rosy tone shimmer, you don't have in the Glamlight palette. So if those are shades that really speak to you, it is an affordable palette, so it may make sense to go out and buy it at that point. But if you have the Glamlight one, I feel like you probably already have the majority of the shades in the Bretman Rock palette. And then another palette I thought looked really similar is the Juvia's Place Warrior 3 palette. So this one again has the red, it has that bright pop of blue in it, it has a deeper blue shimmer, you also have a deep purple matte, the green matte. I mean, you really have a lot of the same shades. Again, the Juvia's Place one doesn't have quite as many shades in it, so you're getting additional ones in the Bretman Rock palette, but it really just depends on what shades are speaking to you in the new palette and if the Juvia's Place has those or not. And then the last similar palette that I found is the Makeup Revolution Wild Animal Integrity palette. This one again just has that same mix of colors, and it's easy to find bright palettes, but it's not always easy to find this exact mix of shades because it's a little bit more interesting. It's not just a neon palette, you also have like the deep forest green again, you have these deeper purples, the deep red, the orange. So it's a little bit of a different mix than your average everyday rainbow palette, and I definitely think the Makeup Revolution one comes pretty darn close. Alright, so next up, let's talk about this new Milani and Salt and Pepa collab. So Salt and Pepa, I listened to them in the 90s. I was really into them. I actually have home videos of me and my best friend doing some of their songs, which I would probably never let see the light of day because they were horrible. But anyway, I love how these look like a CD case. I think it's really cute and definitely throwback and nostalgic to the 90s. But these two palettes did remind me of quite a few additional palettes that I already have in my collection that you guys might have as well. So let's start out with the first one, which is called Very Necessary. And when I saw this, immediately I thought of the Colourpop Disney Villains Misunderstood palette. It has almost all of the exact same colors in here. You have that shimmery yellow, you have the light purple, you have that deep forest shimmery green, you have the navy blue shimmer, you have the coppery shade. I mean, really just looking at them side by side, it's kind of like crazy how similar they are. So that's the first one. And then another palette I thought looked really similar to it as well is the Urban Decay Born to Run palette. So this one, again, has a lot of those similar shades in here. You have on the left side those purpley shades, then you also have the blue, you have the green. You know, the Urban Decay Born to Run has a full spectrum of colors in here, so you really have everything to choose from, but I feel like the tones are very similar. They're almost like a little bit more on the muted side. They're not super bright colors, and that's the way that it is in the Salt and Pepa palette as well. So I thought those two looked pretty close. And then another one I thought looked really similar is the Too Faced Chocolate Gold palette. So in this one, you don't have that deep blue, but you do have the purples in here again. You have the deeper purple and then kind of like the purple purpley pink shimmer. You also have that bright gold shimmer, the bright green shimmer. You have the black, you have the matte ivory, you also have that kind of whitish silvery shimmer. So I do think there's a ton of similarity between these two. You're really just missing that blue shade. And then the last one that I thought this looked like is the new BH Cosmetics Smitten in Switzerland palette. This one, again, I know I compared this one to the Carly Bible palette and they looked very similar as well, but this Salt and Pepa palette has the greens that the Carly Bible doesn't, so I feel like it's even closer to the Smitten in Switzerland than the Carly Bible palette was. You really have a lot of the same shades. You have the deep blue, you have kind of the darker purple, as well as the lighter pinky purple. You have some of the same neutrals. Just looking at the two side by side, I feel like they have a really similar vibe, and I think you could get very similar looks with them. And then the second Salt and Pepa palette is called Hot, Cool, and Vicious. And this one, when I first saw it, immediately I thought of Colourpop again, the Yes Please palette. I think the Yes Please has a lot of really similar tones in it. It is missing that kind of pinky mauvey shade that's on the left-hand side of the Salt and Pepa palette. But other than that, I think you have so many of the same tones. You have the bright yellow, you have those reddish orangish colors, the warm browns, you have the matte ivory, you also have that really like light pink shade as well. So again, I think this has a really similar warm tone vibe to the Yes Please palette. Another one it really reminded me of is the Tarte and Adeline Morin. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right, but I think that was in their Sugar Rush collection. And this palette, again, looks really similar. And with the addition of the blush in the Tarte palette, you have kind of that pinkish shade that the Yes Please palette didn't have. You could also probably use that one on your eyes, but it has a very, very similar overall vibe again. I'm not sure if the shades line up exactly or if it's like a shade for shade dupe, but I do think you can get very similar warm tone looks with this one. And then the third palette I thought it looked like is also from a drugstore brand. This is the Flower Beauty Shimmer and Shade palette in Suns Blazin'. And this one, again, you have those warm tones in there. You have that bright pop of matte yellow and those just rich warm tones. You don't have the pinks that the Salt and Pepa one has, which I think kind of sets it apart slightly from all the other warm tone palettes out there. But if you don't really care about that shade, I feel like the rest of the palette is so super close that it really doesn't matter all that much. Alright, so next up we have the new Bronze Goddess palette from Estee Lauder. They come out with one every year, and this year's is particularly beautiful. When I saw it, I immediately was drawn to it and wanted to purchase it, but it is $55 and it's not a huge palette, so that kind of like stopped me a little bit, and then I decided to go through my collection and see what else I could find, as well as look online and see if there's anything similar but maybe more affordable, because $55 is a little bit steep for me to spend on a palette with only 9 shadows, not to mention that they pretty much are all neutrals. This palette only really has 3 pops of color. You have that turquoise, you have the deeper blue, and then you have kind of that mustardy yellow shade. So I think I found one that's almost identical, and it's from Hard Candy. This one just launched very recently. It's their Santorini Nights palette. It's $10. You can find these at Walmart, and this palette has all the shades in the Bronze Goddess palette and then some. Now, I don't know how Hard Candy's formula compares to Estee Lauder, because I honestly haven't tried an Estee Lauder eyeshadow in a really, really long time. I don't feel like they're necessarily known for their eyeshadows, but you guys could let me know down below what you think of them. But for me, Hard Candy's been a little bit hit or miss the last couple of years, but I feel like the last few they've come out with have been pretty decent quality, and you could definitely make them work. And this color story is just beautiful. I feel like heading into the summertime with those blues and turquoises, I think it's gorgeous. And I think for $10, if the quality isn't like terrible and you can make it work, then I think this one is a really good alternative. Another similar palette that I found actually in my own collection that I think is really good quality is from Profusion, and it's their Sapphires palette. This one is only $5 and the quality is outstanding, especially for the price. And you do have, again, all of those similar shades. You have that turquoisey green in there, you have the deep blue, you have that kind of mustardy, tannish yellow color, and then you also have some other neutrals mixed in. So I think this one is a beautiful palette. It's one of my favorites from Profusion, and the price, just, you can't beat it. So I think that one is awesome. And then another drugstore option that I also thought was very similar is from NYX, and it's their Perfect Filter palette in Marine Layer. This one I actually don't have, but I love their other Perfect Filter palettes. I think NYX can be very hit or miss on quality. These are actually really good quality. I don't know, again, about the Marine Layer one, but the ones that I have in my collection, I really enjoy a lot. They are a little more on the pricey side for drugstore. I want to say they're like $20, but I think this particular shade is on sale on their website right now. So if you like the color story of that one, definitely head over there and check it out. Alright guys, so next up we have the Colourpop Sailor Moon collab. This one is launching very soon and I think it's a beautiful palette. When I first saw it, I couldn't think immediately of any dupes. Nothing was really coming to mind. But as I was looking around online, I did actually find a couple of really pretty solid dupes for this one. So the first one is again from Hard Candy. Now, I'm not saying by any means that Hard Candy's formula is as good as Colourpop's because I don't think so. But if you already have found this Hard Candy palette at Walmart, you might have it in your collection already. You may decide you don't necessarily need to go ahead and purchase the Colourpop one because the shades are so similar. So anyway, this Hard Candy palette, it doesn't immediately look like an exact dupe if you look at it because there's a couple shades in here that are slightly off that kind of throw my eye a little bit. But what I did is block out like that hot pink shade and the blue that was kind of throwing my eye. And with those shades gone, you can really see how similar the color stories are in here. You have this light shimmery purple, and then you have that slightly deeper purple matte. You also have the orangey shade, you have the matte yellow, you have the reddish pink in there, you have the neutrals. I mean, it really is super, super close. So if you already have the Hard Candy palette, you definitely have most of these shades in your collection. And then the next one I found, I already have in my collection, and this one is giving me serious pause on buying the Colourpop version because the formula of this one is actually really good. I can vouch for it, and the color story again is really similar. So it's the BH Cosmetics Summer in Saint-Tropez palette. Now again, when you first look at this one, it has kind of some pops of color that aren't in the Colourpop one, so it throws your eyes a little bit. But when I go ahead and remove those shades and just leave the similar ones in here, again, you can really see that it has a very similar color story if you avoid those other shades. So you do again have the matte yellow in here, you have the light shimmery purple, you have the deeper purple matte, you also have again the orangey shade and the pinkish red, you also have like a coppery gold shimmer, you have some neutrals in here. So just looking at the two side by side, I feel like the BH Cosmetics one is similar enough to where I can't really justify buying the Colourpop one, especially since I'm not really like a Sailor Moon fan, so that's not something that is important to me. And then this next palette I used in my last video to dupe the Dominique Latte 2 palette, and it's the Too Faced Clover palette. So this one again does have some additional shades that the Sailor Moon one doesn't have, so you're not going to necessarily see it, I think, right away. But when I block out those other shades and just leave the ones that are similar, you can tell again that it has a very similar vibe to it. You have the matte yellow, you have the shimmery purple, you have that kind of corally orange shade, you have the pinkish red, you have some neutrals, you have the shimmery white. So again, I think this one is very, very similar. So again, if you have the Clover palette, this one might give you a little bit of a pause. Also, if you have the C-Color Cosmetics Fairy Tale palette, which is an exact dupe for the Clover palette, then same thing applies. You probably already have the same colors in your collection already. And then the last dupe that I found is the Makeup Revolution and Roxorus palette. This one is still available at Ulta, and when I first looked at this, if you basically cover up like the right-hand side of that palette with the blues, you have almost the Sailor Moon palette. Like, it's a very similar color story. Again, you have the soft purples and pinks and the yellow, you have the orange, you have the pinky red. You really have, again, a very, very similar vibe to it. So I went ahead and just blocked out those colors on that one side so that you could see how close they are. And just like most of the other ones that I've shown, it's not gonna be an exact dupe, but I do think the similar vibe is definitely there for this one. Alright guys, so the last palette isn't necessarily a new palette, but it's the one that I've gotten the most requests to dupe out of any other palette out there. I get DMs on Instagram about this and comments on these videos that I've done. Please find me a Mercury Retrograde dupe and not one of those knockoff ones either from Amazon. I know you guys want to, find something in your own collection that you can dupe Mercury Retrograde with, and I think I've found a few of them that are pretty close. So the first one is actually two palettes together, but the two of them still are nowhere near the price of Mercury Retrograde, which is $65. So two Profusion palettes at $13 each, so the two together are $26, and that is the Love Struck palette, which is brand new, and also the Festival palette. So I had to pull colors from both of these to equal Mercury Retrograde, but I definitely think I was able to do that pretty closely. So I'm going to go ahead and put those two palettes up on the screen and kind of mark off the shades that I used from each palette. I think I used more from the Love Struck than Festival, but the reason that I grabbed the Festival palette is because it has that mint green shade in it that I needed, plus a couple of others. So now I'll go ahead and show you the swatches. I couldn't fit them all on my arm, so I broke it up into two different parts. So first you're seeing the first almost two rows of the palette. The one shade that I feel like is really off is that kind of silvery bluish glitter that's in the Huda palette. I wasn't able to duplicate that one in either Profusion palette, but other than that, I feel like the tones are really super close. You also have kind of that dusty pink matte shade in the Huda palette that's a little bit more purple in the Profusion ones. But again, I feel like once they're on your eyes, you're probably going to be able to get some really similar looks with it. And then the second half of the palette, again, was really, really similar, but I wasn't able to get that really deep brown kind of with the purple undertone in the Huda palette. There is a deep gray in one of the Profusion ones in the Love Struck palette. But when I went ahead and swatched it, it's just not the same. It's quite a bit lighter. And also the one that's next to that in the Huda palette, it's more of a silver. And in the Profusion, I wasn't able to find that tone. I really just found more of like a golden or champagne color. But otherwise, I was really surprised at how close I was actually able to get to duping that palette with those two. So that was pretty awesome. And then the second one is the Colourpop So Jaded palette. So this one also has a very, very similar vibe to the Huda one. I wasn't able to dupe every single shade in the Huda palette, but I'll go ahead and show you some swatches side by side so that you can see what it looks like. And I think a lot of them I was able to get almost spot on, while others are a little bit different, especially when it comes to the greens. In the Huda palette, the mint green is a matte, and in the So Jaded palette it's actually a shimmer shade, and then the opposite is true for the deeper turquoise green. We have a shimmer shade in the Huda palette, but it's a matte in the So Jaded. So it's a little bit off, but again, I do think the vibe is kind of similar. So if you already own So Jaded, or maybe if you just don't want to spend the money on the Huda palette, the So Jaded palette from Colourpop might be a more affordable option for you. And then the last one that I found is from a brand called Folklore Cosmetics. They're actually based over in China, but they're not a knockoff brand. They do their own thing. I think their quality is outstanding. I've really come to love their palettes. So it's their Sweetest Honey palette. And this one actually came out a year before Mercury Retrograde. So it came out in the fall of 2018, and then Mercury Retrograde came out in the fall of 2019. So they're about a year apart, but I was blown away by how similar these are to each other. So when you swatch them side by side, I mean, holy cow, look at the similarities. Again, I wasn't able to dupe every single shade. You don't have that matte mint green in there because the Folklore one doesn't have that shade, but if you might have that one in a different palette of yours, then this one might cover the rest of those bases for you. I mean, a ton of the shades that I swatched here are basically like spot on, and again, it's a very affordable option that might be worth checking out for you guys. So anyway, that is all I have for this week. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Also, let me know down below what palettes you'd like to see me dupe next. Also, check out parts 1 and 2 because some of the palettes you want to see me dupe might be included already in those videos. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here on the corner of your screen, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye guys!